by placing our feet on the ground and closing our eyes. And I like to begin with our eyes closed, strangely enough, because as storytellers, we're the seers of the world. We are those unique beings who have this very specific role where we see, we listen, and then we bring it into ourselves and we metabolize it and we give it back. And so, in this moment, I want to invite you just to come inside. Stop looking at the whole world outside of you and examining it, but come inside. And I invite you just to find your breath. Just notice, where is your breath living in your body? It might be down in your belly, which is such a great place for it to be expanding. But it might be up in your chest. You might not even be able to find it. You might be just like sipping some air here and there. And I'm going to invite you just to like really connect with this extraordinary technology, this tool that is your body, and bring in this material, this source material for life that is for free, and bring it on all the way down to the very bottom of your belly. See if you can't even expand your back and just become, you can place your hand on the bottom of your back. Just taking a nice deep breath. Just becoming aware of your capacity for expansion, where perhaps you just came up against a boundary where you didn't want to take a deep breath, where your body wasn't prepared for it. So you felt a little boundary. And so as you exhaling, just exhaling out any resistance, anything that's in your way, anything that's in your day that could be in the way of your full presence right now. So just letting it go and taking another deep breath. And as you're breathing, I'm going to invite you to really consider what brought you here. What brought you here? We've already heard a couple of people. Loke spoke about her real desire to tell stories, but really understand what lives in each of them. Not trying to put 50 stories in one story. How to share this wisdom that is hers to share. I don't remember everybody's names, I'm sorry. We have a woman among us who just really bravely and almost easily shared that she is in a moment of facing her mortality. You know, facing this moment that every single one of us will come to, this threshold, this initiation, with eyes wide open. And what story do we carry with us through our lives? And we had another among us who spoke about teaching stories. You know, how do we engage, if not employ, storytelling as a way of being a guide? And right now, I'm going to ask you to even go deeper in yourself. Are you here because there's a story inside of you that's like aching and banging around your ribcage saying it's time for me to get out? Or are you one of those people that I affectionately call creative monsters, where the muse just strikes you with lightning constantly with inspiration? Or are you that person that's a cantadora who's called to carry forth the old stories to make sure that they can continue to walk among us? I ask you for this moment of clarity within yourself. Why are you here? What do you need from this space? Because the more clarity you hold inside of you is going to be a great gift in what we co create together. Because storytelling is a wild and wonderful, unexplainable, alchemical co creation between the storyteller and the listeners. So, what are you listening for today? What are you calling for? I'm going to start you with a quote. I love starting with a quote. The reason why we begin and end with a quote is because it's like bowing to the Tai Chi teacher. You're bowing to all those who've come before him. And so we begin by speaking the words of others, to bow to those who are coming before us on this great journey of writing and storytelling and sharing our gifts with the world. This one goes like this. My cousin Helen, who's in her 90s now, was in the Warsaw Ghetto during World War II. She and a bunch of the girls in the ghetto had to do sewing each day. And if you were found with a book, it was an automatic death sentence. Can you imagine that? If you were found with a book, it's an automatic death sentence. She had gotten hold of a copy of Gone with the Wind, and she would take 3 or 4 hours out of her sleeping time each night to read. And then, during the hour or so, when they were sewing the next day, she would tell them all the story. These girls were risking certain death for a story. And when she told me that story herself, it actually made what I do feel more important. Because giving people stories is not a luxury. It's actually one of the things that you live and die for. That quote is by Neil Gaiman. I'm going to give you one more quote I like to begin with. We think we tell stories, but stories often tell us. They tell us to love or hate. They tell us to see or be seen. And often, too often, stories will saddle us and they'll ride us and they'll whip us onward and they'll tell us what to do and we'll do it without questioning. The task of learning to be free requires learning to hear those stories, to question those stories, to pause and hear silence, to name them, and then become a storyteller. That's Rebecca Solnit. I love beginning with that quote just because it really speaks to, for me, the journey of what it is to become a sacred storyteller, but even more than that, a conscious creator. And what are the steps that we all have to go through to become a conscious creator? First, you got to know what a story is. Then you got to be able to see your role in it. Then you got to actually decide, do I want to take on this story? You know, what stories am I going to give my precious life form to? I love Billy is laughing at all this, right? It's like it's a thing these days, especially in our time when we've got stories rushing at us from all directions. It's like I feel like you got to be like in those like little games where you're like duck and dive, And so we're gonna really kind of get into that today. Okay, so who am I? And who are you? So what are we going to do today? So that's what we're going to go over right now. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to go over the landscape of what is sacred storytelling as a sacred art form. So I'm not going to give you the 6 bullet points to how to tell a story to sell something or sell yourself. That is wow, the wrong class. So if that's for you, um, carry on. What we're going to do is we're like, wow, what is the sacred art of storytelling? How does it connect us to the roots of humanity and who we are as humans on this planet? We're going to talk about what is a story, what is a sacred story. We're going to get a little bit into what is a myth, and really understanding all these things. There are going to be times when I ask questions and like they're real questions and your answers drive our conversation. So please know that I'm asking for your voice. And so you can raise your hand. I'm looking at you. You can do that, or if you want, you can put the answer in the chat box. But please know that your voice is really, truly wanted and asked for, and creates a really rich experience. And at the end, I'm going to give you a story recipe. I'm going to give you a story recipe about how to create your own wisdom story, which is a very specific kind of story. Okay, so a little bit about me. I hail from a very small town in Vermont, Waterbury. When I grew up there was like one little blinking light, and I was on a farm, and I really came into relationship with stories because I was given way too much time to wander in the wilderness by myself. I'll just say that. And so, like, I got to have access to something that many people don't anymore, which is my imagination and really creating and being a part of the natural world and nature. I really learned the story as a healing tool when I was 15 and my best friend in high school committed suicide. And needless to say, I was a bit distraught. And at that time, I had been in theater, I'd been writing, and it was my safe place, And I went there to try to make sense of the world. And that play I ended up writing a play, and it ended up getting placed won an award and got produced by a professional theater company. And I saw it on the stage, and I learned the responsibility of storytelling, because what you put out in the world comes back. And while I was still very young and processing my grief and had found a way to do it, what I didn't realize is that I would then be responsible to stand at the threshold of holding other people's grief as well. I learned the business of storytelling by going to New York City at a very young age and went and studied with Sandy Meisner at the neighborhood playhouse, worked off Broadway, worked in summer stock, and I discovered very quickly that that was not going to be my line of business, that I really didn't want to spend my life speaking other people's words. And I also saw that there was something else in the world, that there was this thing of environmental justice, social justice, and I wanted to figure out how to marry my passions together. I ended up getting a degree in environmental education through performance at a beautiful small school in Prescott, Arizona, Prescott College. And there I got to really explore with performance art and, again, working with somatic and movement and into performance. And I ended up getting a master's in social work. Um, I learned that that storytelling isn't exactly what we think it is. And again, like how it's being used against us. When I ended up working for Current Television, which was Al Gore's television network, and I produced and hosted the Green Channel there. So I was right there, right in the center of the nexus of how do we talk about climate change? What are the stories that we tell? And I was working with this recipe. What is the information I need to give people to get them to inspiration, to get them to motivation, to get them to activation? And because I was working on an internet website, and we got to see all the data about what people were looking at. And I got to see that people were not looking at the information, that it was actually too much. And I would later learn that actually people can't even metabolize information. If you're one of those that's sensitive to energy, the next time you go into a room, if we're ever in a room together, all again together, but like when you go into that space and people start giving lots and lots and lots of data, all the energy in the room goes, whoa, because people can't metabolize it. You tell people a story, now we are back into the way that humans make meaning. And I learned that in the realm of climate, that that's what people were paying attention to. They're paying attention to the stories, and it liberated me. It liberated me onto the path of my true calling. And I ended up going back into this realm of really working with story as a tool for healing and for transformation, and really looking at how do we create healing in that space? I ended up creating story ceremonies that we traveled all around across the country, where we worked with an old story and we worked with how to shift it and transform it. And in that space, I learned that we don't actually change our stories. Our stories change us. And they change the way that we live our stories, and they change the way we tell our stories. And so this is a little bit of what we're going to dive into today. So I like to start with some of the most ancient knowledge on the planet. Let's just get right into what the ancient civilizations understood. Hawaiians believe that words are so powerful that they can raise enough energy to slow the world or to set it into motion. Can you believe that? That words are so powerful that they have enough energy to slow the world or set it into motion. You know, when have you watched a storyteller or an elder stop time? Or speed it up. I really invite you to go on YouTube after this and watch hula. Hula is an embodied prayer. You know, we are lucky enough to still have a few cultures that have not lost their relationship to their old ways. And in this culture, you will see and you will feel the resonance of people that know that they still speak to the clouds, that they can call the rain. And what is it to feel people who are in that kind of deep connection with their language? Sicilians believe that words poke holes in the universe. I always think about that. Sicilians, I imagine, have know a thing or two about anger, and so they have a little bit of wisdom there. And I think about that when I feel the heat rising. That which you say cannot be taken back; it lives there forever. You know, you might be able to do repair, but you can't take it back. Australians say that the stories of the past must be sung to the present so that the future can exist. Maoris say that words don't describe a thing, that they are the thing. In Japan, they have a word called kotodama. It means word spirit, and it refers to the original divine spirit of a word. before it enters the world of thought waves, the spirit of a word. So that this significance of Kotodama is that words are alive and have a power to create. There's a word, abracadabra. It's one of the oldest words on our planet. There's even disagreement about where it originally comes from, but right now we'll say that it comes from the ancient Aramaic mysticism. It says, I create as I speak. So now we're kind of getting into the oldest wisdom to understanding our unique role on this planet. That we are creators. We are creators on a creator planet. And this ancient wisdom, all the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. I want to say that again because it's kind of mind-blowing when we're in this era and asking if people are bad for the planet. Talk about a dangerous, damaging story. When we understand that all the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. So what will you give your extraordinary life force energies to? What stories will you carry? What stories will you speak? What future will you weave and create through every word that you speak? That's what we're getting into here. I'm going to read this to you because it's one of my favorite little poems. It's called Magic Words. It was translated from the Inuit by Edward Field. In the very earliest time, when both people and animals lived on Earth, a person could become an animal if he wanted to, and an animal could become a human being. Sometimes they were people and sometimes animals, and there was no difference. All spoke the same language. That was a time when words were like magic. The human mind had mysterious powers. A word spoken by chance might have strange consequences. It would suddenly come alive, and what people wanted to happen could happen. All you had to do is say it. Nobody could explain this. That's just the way it was. So let's get into this business of understanding what is a story? What is a story? This is where I ask a real question, and I'm looking at you guys. I have you on gallery view, so you can raise your hand. I'll see you, or you can post a question in the chat box. And yes, Nancy.
I actually had a conversation with my siblings about how a story is maybe fictional, it may be an allegory, it may be a metaphor, but there's more truth to a story than something that happens in real life. We can recognize truth. We can, with capital T truth, we can recognize right and wrong in a story. We can recognize ourselves in a story. And it often has so much more power than a thing that really happened. And, we say it's fiction, we say it's not true, but it's truer than true.
Yeah. You're using a word, it's a big word, this word of truth. The origin of truth, just so you know, it's a carpentry term. It means a straight line. It's the truth. It's when you look down a board. And I'm always wary of using it in storytelling. By the way, you also said metaphor. What is metaphor? But the language of spirit. I love that. So we're and as a storyteller, one of the reasons I love being in the in the role of sacred storyteller as you get to sit back and you get to watch all the stories, and especially this time where, if I was to write a mythic story about our time, I'd say, wow, we're living in the time of many stories happening at once. When you realize, when you look at the history of our global culture, for a good majority of our time, we've lived in small groups where we share the same creation myths, we share the same beliefs, the same values. So when you look at the big picture of humans' existence on the planet, and understand that, for the first time, this is still a relatively new experiment when we've brought so many different groups of people living together side by side. And now all of a sudden we're confronting all these different beliefs and all these different values and all these ways of looking at the world. And now you're looking at this. Now Nancy's been so bold as to say and that stories are true, you know. And I keep looking at all these different stories that apparently seem opposing to each other at this time. And as a storyteller, it's just really fascinating. And I came to this wondering where, you know, and it's like, how can people believe a story that isn't true? You know, and as we look at this, as we look at all of this, and I started to wonder if, as Nancy is speaking, that there's actually perhaps there's truth in all the stories. Maybe the information isn't accurate. Perhaps the facts aren't all whatever true is, but perhaps people are resonating with certain stories because there's a narrative inside of them that has some truth in it. So it's a much bigger way. It's like, how big of a story? You know, now we're looking at concept. Now we're looking at power structures. So it's like, I just invite you, it's like, how big can you bring your perspective to look at a story? It's not to get so mired in the facts and information that it's conveying, but is there something? What is your body resonating with when it says yes to a story? Even, you know, so I invite you into this kind of big way of wondering about the stories of our time. Anyone else want to talk about what is a story? What is a story? I see Adriana have a big smile. You got to take yourself off mute. I can feel the answer coming through you. Yes.
I'm the mom of an autistic adult, and he's with me right now, so the noises are
Okay.
coming from there. So I feel like a story, it's something that wants to be out, something that's pushing to be out, and somehow you need to find a way to tell that. So thinking about truth, um, everything that happens that is so motivated that at the end of the day or somehow during the day you sit and you say, I need to write this.
Mhm.
And it can be the story of a leaf, it can be the story of a bird crossing over a flower. I mean, it's something that you feel, somehow you feel in your guts
Yeah.
that you need to tell, because there is somewhere in the universe someone who's going to read it and you're going to probably, and that is what I feel like writing is like a healing process that cannot stay only inside you, because somehow there's going to be somewhere over there who's going to benefit from it.
Right. I
And
love this. I love this, Adriana. Like what you're speaking to is that you're speaking as a wise woman, you know, that there's something inside of me that will really be of service to someone else, you know, and that, you know, I have this idea that like we don't speak for those who don't want to hear us. And we don't speak for those who aren't ready to hear us. We speak when there's something like what you're speaking to, that something out of us needs to come out because it also lives in someone else. And it wakes that up and it offers a gift at a time that you could never even imagine. And so I love what you're speaking to, that sometimes there's that thing inside of us that's like, get me out, you know, please. And so I love that you're listening to that. And I always say, listen to that, because that's where life force is. You know, it's like that's where your life force is. That's where your eros is, when you answer those questions to those things that are wanting to be given life. Anyone else want to speak to what is a story? Yes, Billy.
I think stories are a way of connecting us with others. As I tell my stories, other people are freed to share their stories back. I also think it's a way to introduce a concept without using information, as you used earlier. I'm in therapy, and I often start therapy as the client saying, I have a story to tell, because I don't know how to get to what I want to say until I tell the story first. And the story may have no factual connection with what I'm working on or need to say, but it's a movement into that.
Right. I love that. And one of the things I understand about storytelling as as a, I was going to say recovering therapist, but as a um, uh, is that there's a credible way of working with story as a healing tool, and it's one of the things I focus on, and I want to speak about it just because you've spoken to it. We saw in the Me Too movement this moment in our history when stories had to be told because they were being kept secrets. And wow, did we see the consequence when I started hearing all those stories and hearing that so many of them were almost verbatim the same. Some part of my human spirit felt very crushed that I was like, if only more women had told their stories, we wouldn't be repeating them.
Yeah.
So, we're talking about we need to tell our stories. So, because they do liberate people. They liberate people from understanding what role they might have to play or supposed to play. They give them the keys to understanding how I feel like it's the greatest way to participate in the human evolutionary process. Maybe it's not biology, but it's our consciousness. And so, but when we look at story, what do we see in the Me Too movement is we saw a lot of trauma being shared, right? It was like, wow, social media got filled with wow, and what did it do? What did it do? It might have been very healing in some ways, but it was also very traumatizing in a lot of ways. And so if we're going to take a story and we're going to say, wow, this needs to be healed, there's a process. And one of them is the very first process is perhaps the most important, which is you bring in some people who you trust can hold your heart. This is really not just anybody. This is not that dear friend who's kind of competitive with you. Okay. We all have them. It's that person who can just sit with you and hold your heart no matter where they are, where you are. And you make a very specific request. You ask to be witnessed. Okay, I'm going to tell you a story, and I'm asking you to witness this. And I'm not going to. I don't need to explain. I don't need to give you more details because you don't understand something. I don't. You don't need to dig. There's a really specific thing. I'm just going to tell the story as it's coming through me, and I just want to be witnessed. And there's this point of being believed that's very important. Okay, this is step one in terms of healing a situation through story. And so, and then when I actually work with people, we do a series of what is it to release the story in that form, and we'll work with story, ritual, and ceremony. And then we go to another place where we actually engage the mythic dimension, where we can see what's the soul story, what was going on behind the dimensions, and get a really big perspective of what was happening. So it's no longer our human story, but the story of our soul, the story of our spirit. And in that process, we then start to come back, we bring it back into this dimension, and we say, well, how was I changed by this story? What were the gems? What part of me was ripped open? The earth, she gets ripped open, and look at those gems that are inside of her, right? And you polish them up, and now look, we're all wearing them, and so it's a bizarre thing, right? But so it's like, what part of you got ripped open and exposed? That exposed this gem, this part of your medicine, this part of now you have something to give. There's another piece that I'm going to play with on this, and so then it becomes a wisdom story. Just to finish that piece, now you have something to give. And you're not speaking from that place of trauma. You've gone through a whole process, and you've allowed that process of being changed by your story. And I'm going to hand you a little creation story that I've been working with, and I'm just going to give you an ounce of it. It's a long. This story is this big, but I'll give you this part, and I hate the term wounded healer. I just hate it, and here's why. Because it's sort of like, I am one of those people that walk through the threshold of having cancer, and these people afterwards are like, oh, join the survivor run. And I'm like, oh, no. Why would I go be constantly tagged as a survivor for the rest of my life? It constantly places me into this role of that. How about I'll be a thriver for the rest of my life? That's how I want to live personally, and and so I started really thinking about this kind of stigma in some ways. And what if we just change the narrative slightly? And we looked at, again, this is a worldview. So this is not everybody's worldview. And we're just playing here with story. But what if, there are these soul beings that looked down at this beautiful planet Earth and saw that she was going to go through one heck of an initiation. She was going to go through rites of passage. And they said, girlfriend, I've got your back. I'm going to come help you. I'm going to come help you. I'm going to bring you my medicine, and I'm going to like really be here for you as a guide, as a sister, as a brother, as you go through this initiation. What if we're not actually on the great Mother Earth? What if we're on Maiden Earth and we're holding the dream of who she wants to become as the great mother? And so, what if in that time, those beings that came to this planet said, okay, I'm going to come and I'm going to bring all my medicine. And in order to understand the wound they had that they were going to heal, they had to know the wound inside out. So now what we have are warriors who are coming in service, who come to understand the wound inside out so that they know what it takes to heal it inside out. And so now think of all of life's initiations that have been handed to you. And we don't live in a culture where our initiations have been stolen from us. It's like we think that it's there's an initiation of birth. It's like maybe I'll think of all these high schoolers that didn't get their high school graduation. I'm like, oh my God, it's one of the few initiations we get. Or college graduations. These are considered our initiations now. Marriage. How many people don't get married and don't get that initiation? And then there's and then death. Those are kind of the main ones. There's so many initiations that happen in between. We are being initiated by life constantly, but without the context, it looks like just pointless suffering. So think about the last time your house got burned down, or you got a divorce, or amazing things too. Women go through, all men and women go through the changing times of life, and changing into menopause, changing into the wise woman and the wise man. These are all initiations. And when we understand, we can look at them as sacred storytellers and give them the context, not just a horrible thing that happened to me, but a time when I was being initiated by life. Not all of us make it through initiations. We understand that. But when we're strengthened by them, when we understand what they are and that they're a calling out of strength that wouldn't be called out in any other situation, now we can have access to another part of ourselves. But again, look at that. It's all in narrative. It's all in context. It's all in perspective. So, a story, you guys have spoken some beautiful things about what a story is. I'm going to be very unpoetic, and I'm going to say that a story is an operating system. I'm speaking through the language of humans because we always refer to ourselves in reference to the latest technology. So going off of that, if a story is an operating system and it shows ourselves, it teaches us values, belief systems, and what we believe is possible. Teaches us what roles we should play. Now, look at what they call television programming, right? It's all in our language. Stephen Jenkinson says, I don't trust storytellers, but I trust stories. And I would say the same thing about words. I don't trust the keepers of words, but I trust the words themselves and that they emerge in the most amazing time. I'm going to also, here's a word that's been tragically hijacked, apocalypse. It sounds horrible to be living in apocalyptic times, I mean, and the way that word is demonstrated, has been hijacked, is it shows us the end times, and not particularly end times that I want to be a part of. But look, apocalypse means the origin of the word, it's a Greek word. It means a lifting of the veils. It means, honey, we're not in Oz anymore. Pull back the curtain and let's see what's really going on. And we're seeing that. It's not like racism and sexism and classism and all these things have not been going on for eons, but for some amazing thing in the last 2 years, wow, did the curtain get pulled back? Do we have the language? Do we have the tools to amplify the stories? All these things. It's like now we can actually see what's really there. That's apocalyptic. It's extraordinary. So again, reclaiming, going back, if there's ever any time that you're suspicious of how a word's being used, go check out the etymology, the origin of that word. It's going to tell you the truth of it. Truth, there's that word again. Okay, so we got to understand that that's what a story is, and one way that it's used for and against us. Now, let's talk about what is a sacred story. What's a sacred story? Sacred, this is an awesome time to kind of engage eloquence. Eloquence is when you feel that little tickle in your sense. and you're like, I can feel that something wants to come through me. I don't know exactly what it is, but I can feel the spirit of it. And you can just go slow. Speak as you listen. So if you feel that tickle, yes, Michelle. Oops, you're on mute.
Okay. I'd say it's an inspired message that comes through time and space.
Okay, so a sacred story is an inspired message that comes through time and space. I'm hearing the universality of it.
Yes.
And it's not attached to any specific time, but that there's a spark in it, right? Inspiration. That's life force giving. There's some juice in that kind of story. Okay, so
And
it's
the story, in a way, invites us to move out of the limitation that we're in and move into this broader scope of things. It's an invitation to move boldly forward.
wow, I love that. So what I'm hearing you speak to is this story that it's like another way of that's coming alive in me as you say that. It's a story that invites your highest self to the table,
Yes.
this bigger
Yeah.
story, your biggest self. So a sacred story can actually perhaps paint a vision or help you face the world, but call out your greatest self in it. How do you play a role in creating the world that you most want to be part of, rather than be painted a world that makes you feel a little bit dead inside and wants you to leave as fast as you can. You might as well get all your fish out of the ocean, since it's going to be empty anyway pretty soon. So it's
I-
like I'm hearing you say, oh no, this the sacred story calls out your best self.
Yes.
How am I going to be part of
Yes.
the solution? How am I going to bring my best self to this version? Great. Thank you, Michelle.
And I'd like to add, I
Mhm.
found when this has happened that when I write in this way and I speak these words, they are beyond my initial comprehension and I move into them. The comprehension comes through speaking the words and letting the sound of the words resonate within me. I feel the truth of those words. I resonate with them. And eventually, I grow deeper and deeper into understanding the meaning of what I've written. And it's
Mm,
like this message, it's like it falls into the cauldron, you say in English? It falls into the bottom of the cauldron and it takes time. It has to travel inward and
Yeah.
deposit itself within.
Yeah.
And then sometime, someplace, somewhere, the meaning is revealed.
Yeah. So, Michelle, what I hear you speaking about is this creative process,
Yeah.
this creative process of opening your channel and
Yes.
allowing this energy to come through you. And as
Mm.
you speak it, you're also speaking about there's lots of different ways. I'm not going to get into storytelling technique, but I will just mention that Michelle is talking about this process of transmission, where sometimes we can give all the details. It's sort of like we color in the coloring book and say, this is exactly what it all looks like. But there's another way of talking story, which is about allowing the transmission to allow the story to live through you, so I can take you, you know, um, I can take you into the ocean without describing it, by just letting the energy flow through, you know. And so what did we talk about earlier about how how the stories can how we can transport people through stories? That's one of the things that's amazing about storytelling, is that we have people are we're developing all this they call it technology and these VR systems to transport people into other realities. But humans have the most extraordinary technology, where we can location travel, we can reality bend, we can world build, we can go back in time, we can go into the future. all through our minds. And we can go there together. Cheryl, I see your hand.
Is it still okay to give a definition of,
Sacred,
so
sacred.
I scribbled this out a while ago. I hope I can read it. A sacred story is a creature that takes on a life of its own with a mind of its own. It is an honor to be invited to follow along this mystical path.
Read that first line again.
A sacred story is a creature that takes on a life of its own with a mind of its own.
Yeah.
I guess I should tweak that, creature
Yeah. No, I actually
formed already, but you get my drift.
I got your drift. I caught you. When I first started really working with sacred stories, and I was like, wow, they're living beings. And I was like, if I tell anyone that a sacred story is a living being, they're going to think I'm insane. And then I actually heard Charles Eisenstein talk about stories as being living beings. And I was like, oh my God, I'm not insane. It's like we're all drinking from the same stream. And a story, when I work in my advanced classes with stories, and we do story ceremonies, and I do a big warning with people. When we talk about which story we're going to say yes to taking on, because the life of that story is going to live through us and our life will be affected by it. And so I tell people, be alert and aware of the true nature of what it is to say yes to being with a story, because it does have a life form of its own. It does have what is it in service to. So as a conscious creator, I always say, what are you in service to? That's your magnetic pole. Are you in service to love? Are you in service to community? Are you in service to union? Are you in service to wisdom sharing? Are you in service to the next generation? It's like whatever your story is, and the more clarity you have about that, I always think of that as your antenna, and then that's going to inform what stories, come knocking at your door. If you're not aware of it, and if you are in service to, let's say, I know some really talented storytellers that are very in service to money. And the stories that will come through that can make money will come through them. But are those sacred stories? And so let's take it and flip it on the side. It's like this idea of what a sacred story is. Then there's a zombie story. Okay, a zombie story is that story that doesn't have a life force in it, that's here to serve life thriving. Michelle so eloquently said, a sacred story, it's here, it is in service of something, and it's in service of life, and it's in service of life thriving. And why do we call it sacred? Because that word defines that. It says, I honor the life in this being. I have reverence and respect. Right. So now when we look at a zombie story, we're like, okay, so we're surrounded by zombie stories. So I invite you to really put on I just have the greatest metaphor. I've been looking for it forever. It's like, I would put, sacred storytelling goggles, but it's sort of like, when you're in the ocean, and ocean is this great metaphor for consciousness, right? And if you don't have goggles on, it's pretty blurry. And if you don't have goggles on, you probably want to keep your eyes shut. And then it's really freaking scary because you know that there's sharks out there, and you know that there's sharp rocks, and you know that there's all this stuff. So like swimming in it is just not that much fun with your eyes closed, for me personally. But you put your goggles on and all of a sudden you can see what's there. So I invite you to place your sacred storytelling goggles on so that you can see through the ocean of consciousness of our times. And so you can say, oh, that's a zombie story. It makes me feel a little dead inside. I feel a little bit icked. I feel kind of gross. I feel like all my energy is woof, and I kind of want to die. Or I definitely don't get inspired. I don't get thriving. I don't feel like my best self has been activated. So really start feeling all the different stories. They come from our family members, they come from our workplaces, we come from the newspapers, they come from the movies. Start really noticing, okay, all these little operating systems that are running around, and what roles are they asking me to play? And I want to be really careful when I speak to this, because I'm not saying, I'm in Hawaii and spend a lot of time in California. And so there's a lot of this, like, don't lower my vibe talk. Don't tell me anything because you're going to lower my vibe. You're like, whoa, dude. It's like, that's not where I'm coming from at all, because that's not a very empowered place. If you're always like running, crouching from the world, is we want to say, okay, look, I understand who I am and what I'm in service to and what I'm going to give my life force to. you know. So how do I use my powerful voice, my voice that can change the world in a way that is meaningful? I'm not saying important, I'm saying meaningful. I learned that from Stephen Jenkinson. What a beautiful distinction, right? So um, I went totally off topic. I have no idea where I am. So sacred stories, zombie stories, using your voice for meaning and purpose. I'm going to hand you a story recipe and end our class that way. This is for a wisdom story. And um, the wisdom story I talked a little bit before, it's like we're on the other side of something. So I'm going to give you a story recipe. Okay. And so a recipe, I don't know how you guys cook, but I don't cook according to what the books say. You know, it's like it's inspiration. You know, thanks for that. And then you move things around, right? I'm seeing a lot of nodding, smiling heads, right? Okay. So obviously you can tell that I'm not a baker. And so when you so 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 a recipe is it's designed to give you the flag posts to inspire you to find your true story. Now look, you are made of stories. There's no way that there's definitely a skill and a craft to telling a story, but I just want you to know you know your story, you've got your story, you know story inside and out, you've grown up with them your whole life, and you don't need these 6 bullet points to guide, you know, to tell a story. You actually already know it, but this is going to give you access. This is not the 6 bullet points. This is going to give you access to listening to your sacred story, and understanding that your story, your sacred story, is bigger than you. John Steinbeck says the story must be about the listeners or it will not last. So there comes a moment when it's a wisdom story, when it's no longer about you, it's no longer your story, it's a giveaway. It's about us. It's about the collective human experience. So to find your wisdom story, let's start with a time that really sucked. Like the more sucky, the better. Okay, so find that time that really sucked in your life. You've got it, and the only distinction. So there's a time when we use story for healing, and a medicine story for the time when we're in the depths and the muck of the suckiness. Okay, we're not doing that right now. It's a totally different process. So to be on a wisdom story, you have to be down the road. You got to be like, you know, at least a year away, you know, and you have to be willing to unknow your story, okay? Because you've told it a bunch of times and you're on a racetrack and you tell the same story over and over again, and it gets etched deeper and deeper and deeper into your consciousness. And we know this about the mind. We actually do. We run racetracks. And so when our thought forms will start going over it. So we're going to try to jump out of it, and we're going to get to see how did the story change you, okay? So we're kind of going into this other form. So there's got to be a humbleness to this, and there's got to be a willingness to say, okay, sacred story, the sacred, the life of this greater story, I'm going to be humble enough just to listen to you. You tell me the story. Okay, so that's my big request on this one. So you have to start with, you know what the instance was, but now the first point, your way in is, where did the story really begin? Where did the story really begin? When I was diagnosed with cancer, my story does not begin on the day that I was sitting across from that desk and that doctor handed me that diagnosis. My story began when I was 4 years old. And on my wall, there was this tapestry that had been hand woven by a friend of my mother's. And it was of this woman that was giving away flowers to all these children. And there was words that were embroidered into that tapestry. And they said, Leah, give what you have. To others, it may mean more than you dare to think. And I was 4 years old. I was just trying to learn how to read. And I remember staring at it and reading it over and over and over again. Give what you have. It may mean more than you dare to think. And I could not make sense of it until I was 30 years old, sitting across from a desk from a doctor who had just said that I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. I had a very quickly growing tumor on my neck. They were going to have to cut across my larynx, and there was a good chance I could lose my voice. And all of a sudden, I knew what I had. Okay, So if you're going to tell me to tell you my story about thyroid cancer, I'm probably not going to start with that. But when I tell you the sacred story, right, the story of my soul, the story of an initiation, that comes up. So ask yourself, and this is where the element of wonder comes in. You just ask the question, and then you get to be inspired by the muse, by the story, the answers. And you can be shocked and awed and amazed by your incredible brilliance. But you're in this, but it's not just your brilliance, right? It's this great collaboration. Okay, so where does the story really begin? Now we're going to go to, what was your initiation? What was the initiation of your soul? Now, again, we're taking it into this universal story. We all go through these initiations. Hate to break it. I'm not so special. You're not so special. We're not so special. We're all in the same different story, different times, right? We're just going around the clock. We're all going to get our time to play and our time to sleep and our time to get our butts worked out. So, what was the universal initiation for you? Something that you might not know about me is that I had certain circumstances in my early life that led me to understand the role of the victim. And I ended up playing it really, really well. I could out victim story anybody. It became a sport. And all of a sudden, this doctor was like coming to me with like this purple velvet pillow with this tiara of victimhood on it. And he was like offering it to me. And something in me snapped and was like, I did not want that role anymore. And that sole decision, it was as if this escape hatch just opened in the like a window in the room, and I jumped through, not having any idea what was on the other side. And here's what was on the other side. When that guy told me there's a very good chance that I could lose my voice, I came back with, rather than tears, I guess you just say that to all the pretty girls, don't you? I started cracking jokes. I started laughing at things. After spending so much of my life crying about things, I found this other part of me, and that became my job. That became my job. I had two jobs: research everything and get in my doctors' faces and my surgeons' faces and make sure that I understood step by step why they were taking such an extreme action. And so that was my ego mind. And then my other part was make everybody laugh. Every time I met with a nurse practitioner, every time I had my blood drawn, every time I met with a doctor, my sole job was to make them laugh and make myself laugh. And it was an extraordinary coping mechanism that ricocheted me out of this other role. When I came out of the surgery and they put this mirror up to my face, and basically I looked like Frankenstein. I had all these X's all across my whole neck. And they're there and they're super scared, and I'm coming out of amnesia and I'm all out of it, and they're all scared, and they're like, well, it's sort of like a hockey stick on your neck. And I look at it and I'm like, you monogrammed my initials backwards across my neck. And they looked at me and they're like, you just cracked a joke. And I was like, again, something was coming out of me that was beyond me. Some part of my soul had showed up that was taking control. So again, what parts of you came alive, and what are you doing? But you're throwing breadcrumbs back, again, across the war field, and being like, look, you can make it through the minefield. Here's a couple hints. They can't repeat what you did, but you can inspire something to come alive in them, and you can give them hints. I don't know how that came alive in me. I just know that it was my time, and something about that circumstance smacked me out of this other reality and gave me an opportunity to step into something else. And something deep inside of me, not my mind, not my ego, something deep inside of me woke up and started coming to life. I would not take back that very terrifying situation for anything. All of that humor, all that stuff, that great coping mechanism, it did fall to the side. I ended up falling into a great, great big depression. So now the next part of your story that you want to come into is, there's always a magi. There's always a Yoda. There's always a fairy godmother. Somebody was there for you. So now you get to go back and you get to even see the things that you might not have recognized, because they can come through unexpected forms. Something about, if you don't know this, when you get your thyroid removed, they actually take out, they don't know how much medication to give you. And so they just kind of like willy-nilly, they just give you something and they see how you respond. For me, they gave me so much, I was on speed. I was like, I came like hopping out of the hospital. I called up my friends. I was like, let's get together. Let's build a garden. And they're like, Leah, you're crazy. You just got out of the hospital. And I was like, I know, I've got all this energy. Let's use it. And thank God I did. And so we built this 70-foot spiral circular garden. And about a week later, I crashed. I lost all my energy. I had nothing left because I was actually like working so hard. And all I had energy for was to get up, go to work, and come home. And I fell into a deep, deep depression because I thought that that was going to be the rest of my life. And every morning I would walk the spiral of that garden. And that garden taught me gratitude. It taught me how to be grateful. Gratitude was not trending. Oprah was not talking about gratitude. I'd never heard of it before, to be honest. But all of a sudden, in that space, in that land, in that deep listening, it came alive in me. And every morning, as I walked out of the spiral, that circle, I prayed. I didn't have a clue what prayer was before this. I prayed for my life. I prayed to be on my path. And those prayers were what brought me to you. So again, it's like we're in that discovery process of what got us through. And it's only through perspective that we can actually begin to see what was really there, what was really revealing. And it's allowing the story to tell itself through you. It's bigger than you are. You know, I'm not trying to get all the details. I'm not talking to you about thyroid cancer and all the logistics of it. I'm telling you the story of a soul and a journey. And that's what our wisdom stories are. Now, ending a story. This takes skill. This takes practice. This takes craft. It's not so easy. And so we're not going to even pretend I can do this in the last couple of minutes that we have together. But what I will tell you is that you can end a story blessing. I learned this from Carolyn Casey. She received this from John O'Donohue. Beautiful, brilliant Irish mystic. Both of them incredible people. And it's easy. It's a very easy thing. It's like when, if, or if then. So if, now we're talking about metaphor, the language of spirit. If you find yourself on a dark and stormy night and the waves are crashing and your ship has sunk and you're sure there is no way out, then may the light of the moon cast her path across the ocean, creating a still place for you to journey on until you are safely with 2 feet on the ground on shore. You end with this blessing, and people end your story receiving the blessing of you having been blessed by you, and nobody's paying attention to that you didn't make the perfectly neat ending to a story. Okay, you can do that. Just so you know, I wrote that story in 10 minutes. I wrote it for a storytelling festival, a little competition. You can do it too. I just asked those 4 questions. Where does my story really begin? What was the initiation? Who was there to get me through? End with a blessing. It's a very, very simple recipe, and your genius can come through with it. So that was our class today. If you feel complete, then may you be on your way. If something in you is like, wow, this whole sacred storytelling thing, I think I want a little bit more of that, I'm going to stay on for a couple more minutes, and I'm going to share some ways that we can continue to weave together and some live classes that are coming up. And that's how we'll end our time together. And I'll end with a quote when we're all said and done. Okay. So the courses that are coming up, I'm going to show them to you right now. We have a course that starts at the end of the month, and this course is called Speak Your Spark. And this is a really fun class. Over COVID, I rejiggered my entire world program so that I could really act on everything I'd been learning in terms of where were people getting stuck and where were people not breaking through in the storytelling classes, And I used to have this 9-month program. And I'd noticed that a lot of people, they came, but they weren't breaking through the other side. And so I created this program. I just put the link in the chat box, and it's called Speak Your Spark. And this is now I do my programs in these 6-week segments, and we do a 6-week segment, and it's designed to go through the body, designed to go through the different energy systems of your body and where our stories get stuck there, or where our blocks and barriers are there. Because as storytellers, we're creators, and this extraordinary body is our vehicle for where the sacred story, that life form, the muse, the ancestors, whatever it is that's coming through. So if things in our bodies are stuck, then our stories get stuck there, and they can't get liberated to get out. So this is really the thought process behind this program: is how do we liberate ourselves in essence. And so this course is designed to go through your third chakra. So we're looking at how do we use our voice for purpose and passion, and we do this by having a lot of fun together. This is like, I feel like I won the lottery when I get to do these courses. Like let's live in a meaningful way where we bring our life force to the times that we're in, and all through creativity and play and storytelling. So I brought together, I'm going to share my screen just for a second so you can see what the course is. And it's 6 weeks long. We meet on Tuesdays together, and then on and then we have these other 5 guest speakers who are amazing. And so what we're doing is we're working with together. We work together, and we're like, okay, who are you as a creator? So you get to see what your creator matrix is. What is the operating system of your unique creation process? And so I'll give you a process where you create a sacred space in your home. And the physical act of doing that is actually going to reveal all your strengths and then all your challenges and the things that get in your way of you being in the fullest expression of Eros through your storytelling, but through your life. And I did this because it's a long story, but over COVID, I ended up doing this process, and it almost took me to my knees in humiliation, because I've been a professional creator for over 25 years, and I saw blocks that I had never been able to see with my eyes, or through my own known experience before doing this process in the physical form of changing space in my home. So I was so excited that I was like, okay, I want to share this. So that's the foundation of this course. So we meet on Tuesdays, and we get to really get through who you are as a creator, what's coming through you, what are the blocks, what are the barriers, and we do really fun creative processes to move all that energy. Then we get accompanied by this amazing team of um, of guest speakers, and these people are incredible. They're from all around the globe. Chloe comes to us from the UK. She just taught a course for like 2,000 people through the Shift Network, and she's all about liberating the voice. And she's going to bring us the 7 sounds of love. And it's really about, she's so much fun. She's so playful, and she's going to, if you have any story that you can't sing or you can't use your voice, we're gonna play with that story, and you're gonna have so much fun with her. Then we've got Justin Michael Williams, who's going to be really, again, talking about how do we use our voice for purpose and about the things that we really care about. And so he's going to be touching on resilience and radical change. And he's really going to be talking about how to use our voice in the times that we're in, and then how do we use our voice in a way that it can be heard in this movement for equality. We have Celia Alario, who has worked with so many extraordinary people working as on their getting their voice out in the press. And she helps people also like speak on the stage. So if you have any part of you that doesn't feel like you can rock it on the stage, Celia is she's fun, she's playful, and she's looking at how do we look at speaking as a sacred art. I love that. Jan Blake is coming to us from South Africa, and she is talking about how the old stories can teach us how to live in this new world. So we're going to get to learn that skill of weaving those old stories, and she's particularly focused on the feminine wisdom that's in them. And then we have Erin Lindberg. And Erin Lindberg, what a gift to get to bring her to you. She lives in the most remote jungle of Maui, and she has this way about her that is so well studied and so skilled at understanding how the body works. And she's going to bring you into a whole new way of being in practice with your body. So really looking at the whole system. I'm so excited for these people. So the way that it works is this is part of a longer program, but each one is designed to stand on its own. And we're really looking at what's inside of you that's gone unspoken and wants to be shared with the world. And you don't have to know that right now. We're going to do all these different activities and fun ways to come together to do it. So the thing that, in terms of how it works, there's all this stuff that I tell you about, but I want to just tell you the logistics really quickly, is that is that when you register for this course, you get the course, where we meet 6 times together as a collective. Then we have another 6 classes with those guest teachers. If you can't, so you get 12 live classes. So if for any crazy reason you can't come to a class, don't worry, you're okay. We get the recordings and you can watch it. But here's the other part that I just love about this class is that you also get a small group that you can meet with outside of class, where you can even deepen your practice. You don't have to have that small group. It's totally up to you. But I have found that so many people keep meeting with those groups, that there's a depth and a quality that happens that deepens the work and solidifies it into your daily life. In terms of, and then after this course, there's a 4-week skills class, and that's where we get to practice the art of telling vision stories. And so if you take them together, you get a reduced price, and there's payment plans and all that kind of good stuff. So that's the skinny on that. So if you know that that's for you, I say, like, don't pause, because if you know that's for you and you know it's your time, I get so excited about it because I've seen people go through these classes and I have seen them come alive in ways that none of us could have expected. And that's why I get so excited about this course, because being a sacred storyteller, I think, is one of the most profound roles that you could play in these times on our planet. The stories that we tell, the houses are going to burn down or crumble, the statues will fall, the cars will rust, but our stories can be carried far past our own lifetime. And it's an opportunity to play a part on the planet in a way that can't be lost. It's a way of giving the gifts. And so I've understood that, like, I don't know, it's one of the most amazing ways to be alive in this time is through this way of being together. So what I love to do is, if you feel that this is for you, the Eros is coming alive in you, you want to play with a global community and really ignite this energy inside of yourself, then uh, I would say register, because in the next 24 hours, I offer a gift, which is when you register in the next 24 hours, I also give you my full library of masterclasses. So this is like 4 years of masterclass teachers, from Charles Eisenstein, from Stephen Jenkinson, who I mentioned before, to Rachel Bagby, to Michael Mead, like the extraordinary teachers. So it's an extra 30 hours of classes right there, and that's, I charge separately for that, but for you, it's just a gift when you register in the next 24 hours. And if you don't want to have to wait to get your creativity going between now and the end of the month, I offer a brand new, very fun video series. It's called 33 Creative Prompts to Heal the World. And these are all prompts to get you writing and reflecting and exploring and playing. And you get that as well. So 2 really fun free gifts if you go in and register in the next 24 hours. If you're like, well, that's fun, but that's not for me, like, whatever, that's not for me, I have another course that's starting up called the Creative Launch. And this is just creative prompts. So we come in together, we go over these creative prompts, you get to create, you get to share. And if you're someone who's actually working on a project and you really want to workshop it, I have a very small group of 6 people where you can come together and you can workshop those classes, and workshop your creations. So that's another class. It's called the Story Starter Lab, is what that class is called. And if you're in this moment where you're like, that's cool, but what I really want is one-on-one work, I do something called storytelling priestessing. And I work one-on-one with people when they know that it's their time to really bring a story or bring a great project into the world, but they really need someone at their side to really help with the story, but also help with who they are as a person who's birthing the story into the world. And so I offer those sessions. And lastly, I do one-on-one sessions called Soul Stories. And it's an ancient form of mystic storytelling where I read what's in people's field and how their story is playing out in the mythic dimension. So it's a form of divination storytelling, and it comes with song and story. And what we do is we take the time to really explore, how does that story apply to your life? How is it living out in your life? And what does it offer in your own journey of making sense of it and exploring how you're living in your world, in your own story. So this is a moment when we can speak to, if there's any questions, I'm totally open to hear questions if you have any that are in you. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. And one way that we can end, if you want to take yourselves off mute and just speak like one thing, like what was something that you're taking away with you? There's one thing that you're taking away with you. And then we can say goodbye. And I love this thing of just speaking it out loud because so much happened. And this is a way that we can kind of gift each other. You're like, oh, right, that thing. I want to take that away with me too. So it's generous when we share something that came alive in us, that we want to anchor it in and make sure that we take it away with us.
Encouragement.
Encouragement. Great.
Hello, Leah. Thank you for your words. For me, what I take away from here is a confirmation of how powerful words are.
Mm.
It's something that I constantly feel, and how important is how we use our words in our everyday interaction. So thank you for the confirmation.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you. I create as I speak. Abracadabra.
Thank you, Leah. That was really interesting. It was great. I've got to run because I got someone coming to pick me up, but I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Adios. Bye, everybody. Enjoy your stories. Okay, bye.
Okay.
I'm taking away the realization of the importance of my stories. I've been encouraged for 20 years to write, and I didn't know what to write. And I'm not sure I still do. So I'm processing what you've shared about what you have to offer to see where that might lead. I know my stories are important. I know it. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. All right, good people. We can all take ourselves off mute and say farewell. Dave, thank you for being with us. It's always a brave man that ends up in this sea of women.
Hi, brave man. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Mahalo, Leah.
Thank you, Leah.
You're welcome. Okay, bye-bye.
Aloha.